Hi guys, it's Lizzie from the Academy team and welcome to this 5-part series on the basics of photography. Our aim is to give you the confidence to move off that automatic mode and start experimenting with your manual controls. Stay tuned for part 1 where we'll be taking a look at how your camera works, covering off some of the terminology we'll be using as this series continues, and we'll also take a look at lenses, specifically the different types of focal length that you can get, and a look at memory cards. Okay, so let's get started with the fundamentals of photography and how a camera actually works. Now, it's probably easiest to understand if we take a look at what the word photography actually means. It's derived from the Greek language where we have photo, meaning light, and graphy, meaning drawing or writing. So when you put those together, you get drawing with light. And the cool thing is we can actually track that journey light takes through a camera. This diagram illustrates our very first part of that journey through the lens's first element of glass or front objective. That light then passes through several more elements of glass as it reaches something called the aperture. The aperture is a hole that can be varied in size, very much like our iris and pupil relationship in our own eyes. So if we need more light to see, our iris opens up wide, and if it's too bright, then our iris gets smaller to limit the light coming in. The aperture in a lens does the same thing. It can be automatically controlled by the camera, or we can manually override it. We'll be talking in detail about the lens aperture in part 2 of this series. Once that controlled amount of light has travelled through the aperture, it comes next to the camera's shutter. If you have a DSLR camera, then a mirror will sit just in front of that shutter. Its purpose is to reflect light up into the daylight viewfinder so that you're able to view what the lens is seeing. Now, not all cameras nowadays have mirrors, and in fact, that's where we get the term mirrorless camera from. Instead, the light reflecting up into the viewfinder, the light is directly generated into an electronic image which can be seen in your viewfinder or on the back screen of your camera. The light then travels through the shutter. An easy way to think of a shutter is like a very elaborate blind you might find in front of a window. This time, the light isn't dependent on how much it is open, but rather how long the shutter is open for. In other words, time or speed. This is where the term shutter speeds come from, and we'll be looking at this in detail in part 3 of the series. Once this newly controlled light makes its way through the shutter, it hits its final destination, the sensor. And before digital cameras, this is actually where your film would have been. Just like a film was sensitive to light and then went on to record the image, a sensor does the exact same thing. It has millions of light receptors, or pixels, that turn that light into the digital information or drawing of your image. Once your sensor has that digital information, it then processes it all with its onboard computer, and then it saves it to the memory card. So there we have it. On a very simplistic scale, that's how a camera works. Just as important as camera bodies are the lenses. In fact, most photographers would argue that the lens is the most important part of your camera setup. So what do all these numbers mean, and what difference is it going to make to your photography? The biggest defining factor of a lens is its focal length. Another way to think of that is how much zoom you have or your angle of view. Now, the focal length is described in millimeters and it will be displayed on the top and the front of your lens. Here is an example of what your lens might look like. So I've got the Sony 16 to 35mm lens right here. So 16 millimeters, or 16 as it's described on this lens, is the wide angle, and as we rotate the zoom ring we move through to a 35mm focal length, or a narrowing field of view, and this will bring things closer. Varying camera systems and lenses will all have different numbers attributed to them. However, an easy way to remember this is by thinking that the smaller that number in millimeters, the wider your field of view, or the more zoomed out you are, so you're going to fit a lot more into your shot. The higher that number in millimeters, the more telephoto your lens is going to be. So the more magnified your image is going to appear, and you're going to fit less into your shot. Memory cards are hugely important, not just because these small things are what are keeping your photos and videos nice and secure. So it's not just the capacity that you need to look out for, it's also the speed of your memory card, because that's going to impact the performance of your camera, especially if you're shooting video or you're shooting in continuous or burst shooting modes. Memory card speeds are now shown on every card. For shooting still photos, you can see the speed listed here, and if you want to shoot videos, then the speed is listed here. For video shooting, it's usually best to check your camera's manual for the speed of card it recommends. For stills though, the speed of the card will affect how many shots you can take in a burst or continuous shooting mode without it stopping or slowing down. On most cameras, you'll see an indicator light that stays on until the camera is ready to perform at full speed again. The faster the card speed, the quicker the light goes out. So of course, the speed of your memory card is going to be important if you're shooting fast action, such as sports or wildlife. Anything in fast succession where you're going to be needing to use that burst or continuous shoot mode. Now the other setting on your camera, which is going to play a huge part in your memory card choice, is what file format you want to record in. Now you've probably heard of the two most famous options, JPEG files and RAW files. Okay, so what's the difference? Well, first of all, a RAW file is all of that raw data from your camera's sensor. There's no processing and no compression involved, meaning that you're going to end up with a rather large file size. So why would you want to shoot in RAW then? Well, if you like editing your photos, having all of that raw data available gives you a lot more room to play around with. What you'll find with a JPEG is that they are actually slightly compressed, so there will be bits of data missing, which is sometimes hard to pull back in an edit. Now, of course, if big, massive edits to your photos isn't something that you're interested in, and all you really want to do is shoot and share the photos that you take, then shooting in JPEG is going to be a perfect option for you. So that's the end of part 1 of our Photography Basics series. Join us again for part 2, where we'll be taking a look at the lens aperture and aperture priority mode on your camera. I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, please give us a like. Don't forget to hit subscribe and smash that bell icon so you can stay up to date on all of our latest content. Thanks for watching guys, and I'll see you on the next one.